Don't try to with me.
What?
Wake her. She was dead, and then I wake my brother up, and...
Real hell in a religious family as he killed her, but he couldn't silence her totally. But she got the last words that helped investigators solve the case. Get ready as we reveal the case of the Tokars family. This is Solved Files, a place where crime stories are being brought to your doorstep. What are you waiting for? Just hit the subscribe button for more fascinating and suspense-filled crime stories. Now let's get back into this story and uncover this mystery.
Don't try to with me.
What did your mom say?
I'm not trying to with you.
Ricky Tokars, an 8-year-old youngster, was spending Thanksgiving with his family 2 years before the recording of this clip. He shared a home with his mother Sarah, father Fred, and younger brother Mike. They looked like the ideal family, according to some. But on November 29, 1992, Ricky's life took an awful turn for the worse. Upon returning from their vacation, little Ricky and Mike were only able to witness in horror as their mother was murdered in front of them. Detectives quickly look for her prominent lawyer husband, Fred, but they find that he is still out of town that evening, raising the possibility that Ricky and Mike are still in danger. However, Sarah continues to leave hints that both shield her children from harm and expose the identity of the true mastermind.
He killed her, but he didn't silence her. She got the last word.
In 1992, 6-year-old Ricky Tokars resided in the Atlanta suburb of East Marietta, Georgia, with his parents, Fred and Sarah, their dog Jake, and his 4-year-old sibling Mike. Sarah is a stay-at-home mother who adores her children unconditionally, and Fred is a prosperous criminal defense lawyer with his own firm. On November 25, 1992, the Ambruscos, Sarah's family, and the Tokars gathered in Florida for Thanksgiving. Together with their own families, the 7 sisters get together for a great, happy reunion at every event. Fred informed Sarah that he would return home on his own because he had to travel for a conference in Alabama. Thus, it has been a family custom for the Ambruscos to get together and wave goodbye to each other as they leave the house on November 29, 1992. Everyone was cheerful, and they would all be getting together for Christmas soon. As Sarah and her boys prepare for their 8-hour trek home, they bid each other farewell. Police received a call late that night regarding 2 small boys who appeared on an unfamiliar person's porch, shivering and covered in blood. The children, overcome with emotion, begged for assistance from their mother. Police quickly arrived at the neighbor's residence and checked out the situation. When they approach a white car that has been abandoned in a ditch, their worries are confirmed. Upon closer inspection, they discovered Sarah Tokars' 39-year-old body inside. What happened to Sarah Tokars? Who was behind her death? Investigators found very little information after searching the car. In an attempt to find any information that would lead them to the murderer, the police returned to the Tokars' residence. When they look into the house more, they find that there's more to the story than what first looks to be a burglary gone wrong. The entrance from the patio to the kitchen was unlocked, and there were no indications of a forceful entry. However, the detectives discovered that the lock had already been broken before that evening. It makes less sense the more they uncover these mysteries. Since most burglars prefer not to be seen, if someone is pulling up in front of a property, they will typically jump out the back door and run, hoping to avoid being discovered. Nevertheless, while drawers and other items had been dragged out, nothing was taken. There were undoubtedly valuable items in there that a thief would steal. That is to say that this was a planned scene.
Some drawers were open and there was some jewelry laid out. This led us to believe that it was a burglary gone wrong.
Ricky, age 6, and his younger brother Mike had just seen the unthinkable. The police were overcome with shock and bewilderment, but they had no choice but to look to Ricky for answers, and he was able to show his mother strength. He gave them a brief rundown of what had happened, saying that their mother had been shot before they had been abducted from their house. Ricky called the weapon he was carrying a pirate gun. Thoughtfully, the boys are still in danger, even though they may have escaped death. The investigators are concerned that the children might become the next target because they are the only witnesses to the attack. Ricky replied that his father was out of town when they questioned where he was. investigators discovered he was lodging at a motel in Alabama, over 200 miles away. When they managed to get in touch with him, they informed him that his wife had been killed. With obvious distress over the news, Fred Tokar felt terrible. While their father is out of town, Ricky and Mike stay with other relatives. As the family struggled to process the news, Ricky asked if they would be able to go see their mom in the morning, thinking she was still in the hospital. Regretfully, Ricky and Mike are overcome with grief. Their mother has passed away, and her murderer is still in hiding. The boys wanted closure, and the police wanted to bring the killer of their mother to justice, but no one could figure out why anyone would want to kill Sarah. Nevertheless, detectives are curious as to whether Fred's employment has anything to do with the murder. They asked Fred about all of his clients and business associates, but he was clueless as to who might have killed Sarah. Fred Tokars portrays his marriage to Sarah as the ideal one, but Sarah's family is already more aware of the two of them than Fred is, so suspicion soon turns against Fred. Sarah Ambrusco married the successful and driven district attorney Fred Tokars in 1985, 7 years before she passed away. From the outside, the Tokars appeared to lead a perfect existence. They welcomed their 2 young boys, Ricky and Mike, over the following 3 years. However, after Fred changed careers, the marriage began to fall apart. He became a criminal defense lawyer and established his own private legal business. As Fred started to consistently miss family gatherings, Sarah started to have doubts about his professional life. Sarah told her sister that she was afraid for her family since she would frequently answer the phone at home and the caller would hang up right away. Fred assured her, nevertheless, that they would never be in danger. However, Fred's pledge was already unraveled in 1989 when Ricky was just 3 years old. However, one of their sons discovered a handgun behind the passenger seat's floorboard. Right there and then, Sarah realized that something was seriously wrong, and her 2 sons became her main priority to safeguard. Fortunately, Ricky is not injured or the gun goes off, but Fred's hazardous and reclusive lifestyle is now directly endangering the boys. Sarah, on the other hand, was scared for them because she considered how much worse the situation could have been. Fred became aggressive and domineering very quickly, and the entire family suffered. Sarah wanted a divorce because she thought her husband was having an affair because of Fred's frequent absences. But Fred informed her she would never be able to take the kids with her. Sarah also decides to work with a private detective to collect proof against him. Sarah was prepared to put herself in danger to ensure the safety of her boys, but she wanted more and stronger evidence against Fred, even if the investigator had proven that he was cheating on her. Sarah looked through his office after he left the house. She was going to discover why he had kept her from going there. She quickly discovered documents that confirmed her concerns about Fred. Sarah said to her sisters that she saved these records as insurance in case they divorced, and he attempted to claim custody of the kids. She planned to use the records to demonstrate that Fred was involved in criminal activity. "Make sure to take those papers to the police if anything happens to me," she instructed Chrissy after giving her sister the documents. Chrissy submitted copies of the remaining documents to the police working on her sister's murder case.
And she told Chrissy, if anything happens to me, make sure to take those papers to the police.
After Sarah passed away in 1992, the police learned that Fred was already being investigated by the FBI for money laundering.
There was an ongoing investigation that actually had started before the murder that involved money laundering through the utilization of nightclubs in the Atlanta area.
However, the records cannot prove his involvement in Sarah's murder, so they are left with nothing. Ricky and Mike remain in Fred's custody, and there's still a killer hiding out there. The children enter the house out of fear of the dark, wondering if their attacker may be waiting for them inside. Meanwhile, Sarah's family is not giving up. John, her father, encourages the family to stick together and fight for the truth and her children's protection. Sarah's family and friends, in a desperate search for answers, organize a reward for any information leading to her death. And right there, a woman accepts the bait about a month after the attack. She turns herself into the police and surrenders her brother, Curtis Rower. Curtis Rower is a drug addict with a criminal record. 24 days after Sarah was killed on December 23, 1992, he was taken into custody by the police. It was unknown to the investigators whether he had a reason for killing her, but if they were going to uncover the truth and save the children, they needed more information from him. Rower requests permission to use his phone to make a call during the interview. He told the cops he had to phone his grandmother after they initially expressed disbelief at his request for a caller. He hung up the phone and added, "My grandmother told me to tell the truth." Eventually, Curtis Rower acknowledged shooting Sarah, but he denied being the one who orchestrated the assault. Eddie Lawrence was the man he named as having paid him $5,000 for the task. Lawrence was reportedly detained the same day, although he withheld information from the authorities. They were skeptical that they had all the details. They quickly learned that Eddie Lawrence was a business partner with Fred Tokars and that he had gone to him for legal advice. This is getting more interesting and complicated. What has Fred's partner got to do with Sarah? After establishing a link between the police and the Tokar family, detectives hauled Fred back in for more questioning, astonished that he had never mentioned his business partner during his interrogation.
You know that man? It's Eddie Lawrence.
This man was never mentioned.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand what you're talking about.
You never told me anything about Eddie Lawrence.
Well, you never asked me anything about it.
Investigators also discovered that Fred had taken out 3 separate life insurance policies on Sarah, totaling $1.75 million before her passing. At this point, investigators are certain that Fred was involved in his wife's murder. But before they put him under arrest, they must make sure they have enough evidence to support his guilt, given his wealth and connections. Even though Fred was still in charge of the children, suspicion was starting to grow against him at this point. The man who was looking after them might be the greatest threat, but Ricky and Mike lived in continual anxiety, fearing that someone would come to take them again. Officers won't be able to do anything until Fred's business associate, Eddie Lawrence, is willing to speak. It was December 24th, 1992, the day following Eddie Lawrence and Curtis Rower's arrests. For Christmas, Fred and his boys spent time in Florida. The Ambruscos wanted to try to lift the children's spirits by taking them out. Fred said he would rather rest in the motel and that he didn't feel like going out. As the hours passed, the family received no news from the boys' father. John, Sarah's father, was worried and went to see how Fred was doing. John went to the manager to collect the key after knocking on the door several times and not getting a response. He found Fred lying on the bed, unconscious, when they opened the door. On the bedside table, there was a bottle of pills and a message. To save his son-in-law, John ran over to take Fred to the hospital. After being taken to the hospital, Fred's life was saved by medical professionals. Nothing new happened for months, until July 1993. It took Eddie Lawrence 8 months after Sarah's murder to decide to work with the authorities. He acknowledges that Fred Tokars paid him to murder his wife because she was too aware of his illicit activities. Lawrence hired Curtis Rower to complete the project because he was unable to complete it himself.
Eddie even went to Fred and said, why don't you just divorce the woman? Fred said, that's not going to do. That's not going to keep her quiet. She knows too much. And Eddie would even say, well, what about your 2 sons? That's when Fred said, well, they'll get over it. They're 4 and 6 years old. They'll get over it. We knew that we were dealing with Fred being the mastermind behind his wife's murder.
Eddie Lawrence's confession gives the authorities the evidence they need to apprehend Fred Tokars. The Ambrusco family was horrified for Ricky and Mike when they learned about the situation. Fred, however, was with his sons at his mother's condo in West Palm Beach, Florida, and as the police came closer to where he was, who knew what he'd do? Without endangering the children, they need to figure out a method to entice him outdoors so they can arrest him. On August 25, 1993, almost 9 months after Sarah was killed, detectives knew Fred was getting impatient with the amount of attention the case and himself were receiving in the media. They decide to turn this against him and congregate around the building while pretending to be journalists. As planned, a gullible Fred approaches them outside. The police arrested him after realizing he couldn't harm the boys once he was outdoors.
We just breathed such a sigh of relief. We're like, oh my God, because in the end, that's all Sarah cared about.
Ricky will still need to confront his mother's killer to ensure that justice is served, even though the kids are now secure. 3 men were incarcerated in 1995 for Sarah Tokars' murder. Fred, her spouse, Eddie Lawrence, his associate, and Curtis Rower, the hitman. They all required their trials. Curtis Rower attempted to argue that Sarah's demise was unintentional. The hitman claimed that once they pulled over, Eddie Lawrence, the man who hired him, approached the car. Then Lawrence reached for the gun, and it went off. To ensure that the killer is found guilty and that the jury understands what transpired, Ricky must now reveal his horrifying night. Around 10 o'clock at night, on November 29, 1992, Sarah pulled into their Atlanta driveway. Mike had been traveling all day and was fast asleep in the back seat. While she took Ricky and their dog, Jake, out of the car and inside, Sarah let him sleep for a few more minutes. The house was silent and dark when she opened the door. She had hardly taken a few steps into the house when a man with a revolver leaped in front of her. He told them to go back outside the house before Sarah could even begin to grasp what was occurring. Sarah followed his instructions without taking her eyes off his, begging him not to hurt them. The attacker kicked the family dog out of the way as they began to walk back into the driveway, frightening Sarah with his violent rage. Mike was still asleep in the back seat of the car, oblivious to the horrors they were going to encounter in the middle of all the pandemonium. The man told Sarah to go in the driver's seat, but she held her oldest boy close to her. Ricky took a passenger seat next to her. After opening the rear door, the man took a seat directly behind her, beside Mike. Sarah caught sight of the intruder's gun aimed at her head through the rearview mirror. She clings fiercely to the hope that they might escape unscathed if she follows his instructions, but that couldn't be further from reality. However, the drive from the house wasn't too long, about 15 minutes. They just arrived at a specific road devoid of any lights. "Don't hurt the boys," Sarah cried in terror as she drove, and he shot her right away.
Take this right.
I want to go down here.
The man leaped out of the car and fled. The car lost control right away and continued till it came to rest in a ditch. As everything comes to a sudden stop, Ricky strikes his head, leaving the little boys by themselves beside their mother's body. Ricky froze in place for a few moments. He reached over and turned off the automobile because he recalled what his mother had taught him about leaving cars running. Ricky innocently attempted to wake his mother since he didn't believe she had passed away. Considering that he was only 6 years old at the time, he believed it to be a small injury that could be treated in the hospital. She didn't move or respond, so Ricky assumed that she was hurt and in need of assistance. After taking off his seatbelt, he opened the door to assist his younger brother in getting out of his seat. The child went outside and made his way to the back door of the vehicle. Then, Ricky grasped his hand and steered him clear of their mother. The two young lads immediately hurried in the direction of the lights they could see in the distance. When they arrived at the closest home, a man answered the door. After realizing that Ricky and Mike are drenched in blood, he calls the police. Returning to the courthouse on February 27, 1995, an 8-year-old Ricky fearlessly approached the witness stand to testify against the guy who had shot his mother. He recalled what the attacker had said to her in the final seconds before the shooting and the scene immediately following her shooting.
Don't try to with me.
What did your mom say?
I'm not trying to with you. I sort of seen if my mom was still awake or if she was dead, and then I wake my brother up, and
You woke your brother up?
yeah, and then I told him we had to go get help, and then we went to go get help.
Ricky experienced unspeakable trauma at an early age, but he strongly responds when the defense raises the question of how well the little boy could recall what transpired.
Yeah, but you know how you the first time you hit a home run, that, you always remember that, don't you?
Yeah, it sticks out in your memory, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's what it was on my mom.
Curtis Rower was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, thanks in part to Ricky's testimony, and he promised never to harm anyone again. Ricky doesn't have to see his father in court during his father's trial 2 years later, but the jury is given a complete copy of his testimony.
We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offender caused or directed another to commit murder.
Eddie Lawrence and Fred Tokars, however, have both been given life sentences. Ricky and Mike moved in with the Ambrusco family following Fred's detention. The two boys are lovingly raised by Sarah's parents, who don't have a relationship with their father. Ricky didn't seem to have spoken to his father since his conviction. Although there are many different ways that people deal with tragedy, Ricky chooses not to let his father rule his life, even if he doesn't forgive him either. Rather, he thought fondly of his mother. What mattered most to her, despite her untimely death, was that she was able to defend her children from her husband. She was silenced, but not before he killed her. Before she was killed, she managed to obtain proof of what he was doing and deliver it to the appropriate parties. The final word went to her. Ricky is now surrounded by his devoted family. They continue the customs Sarah always knew, celebrating the holidays and enjoying time together.
Ricky's the one who makes the Hungarian stuffing. We just do all the same things. And I think as long as we were trying to do all that, somehow there'd be some sort of peace and some sort of joy in their life.
Currently, Ricky began his career as an EMT and lifeguard and has dedicated his life to serving others. He's following his passions now. He works in the surfing sector and has a deep affinity for the ocean and water sports. This case is indeed sad. Who would have thought that a crying Fred would be able to harm his wife? JD, check out our previous video. It's unmopsible to explain.